The perfect challenge. The crystalline spires of the Centauri Imperial Palace pierced the violet sky, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 moons into countless rainbow fractals. Inside the grand testing chamber, Princess Lyra of the Centauri Empire stood before a holographic display, her iridescent scales shifting from deep blue to amber as she reviewed the latest failure statistics. "Your Highness," High Counselor Vex materialized beside her, his energy form flickering with barely contained frustration. "That makes 573 candidates who have failed your trials." The council grows concerned. Lyra didn't look away from the display. "Then they fail to understand the purpose of these tests, Counselor." "As they all do." Her hand, adorned with bioluminescent markings that pulsed with her heartbeat, waved through the hologram, bringing up detailed analysis of each failure. The chamber itself was a marvel of Centauri engineering, its walls composed of quantum-locked particles that could reconfigure into any testing environment imaginable. Today, it stood empty, the aftermath of another failed candidate still evident in the scattered data fragments floating like digital snow. "The Arcturus delegation is threatening to withdraw from the alliance," Vex pressed. "They consider it an insult that their foremost quantum architect couldn't even pass the first trial. Perhaps they should consider why a supposed master of quantum mechanics couldn't recognize a simple fourth-dimensional paradox," Lyra replied, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of Centauri refinement. "We're not looking for someone who can simply solve equations, Counselor. The future co-ruler of the Centauri Empire must see beyond the obvious." The chamber's doors slid open with a whisper, admitting Emperor Nexus, Lyra's father. His form was more energy than physical, a tradition among Centauri royalty, who had transcended their original corporeal forms. "Daughter, the council has made a unique proposal." Lyra turned, her scales rippling with interest. "Unique how?" "They suggest we extend an invitation to Earth." The silence that followed was profound. Earth, a planet that had achieved faster than light travel barely 2 decades ago. A civilization that still largely inhabited organic bodies, that hadn't even unified their global government entirely. "Absolutely not," Vex burst out, his form destabilizing momentarily. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. They're barely more than primitives." Lyra held up a hand, silencing the counselor. "Tell me more, Father." Emperor Nexus's energy form pulsed with approval. "Their quantum physics division has recently produced some interesting theories, particularly one Dr. Sarah Chen. Her paper on intuitive approaches to quantum entanglement has caught the attention of several council members." A human. Lyra accessed the central database, pulling up information on Dr. Chen. The holographic display showed a woman in her mid-30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look beyond the obvious. Her credentials were minimal by Centauri standards, but her theoretical work. "Fascinating," Lyra murmured, reading through the human's papers. "She approaches quantum mechanics almost as if it were art rather than science. Look at this solution, it's practically poetry." "Poetry won't solve the hyperspace conjunction crisis," Vex protested, "or maintain the quantum barriers that protect our worlds." "No," Lyra agreed, her scales shifting to a deep, thoughtful purple. "But perhaps that's exactly what we need. Someone who sees problems not as barriers to be broken, but as patterns to be understood." She turned to her father. "Invite her." "Your Highness." Vex's form flared with alarm. "The political implications alone will be fascinating." Lyra finished for him. "Send the invitation. Let's see how a human approaches problems that have stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy." As the council members departed in various states of distress, Emperor Nexus remained. "You seem intrigued, daughter." "I've reviewed 10,000 candidates from 100 species, Father. All of them approached my trials with the same fundamental assumption, that they were tests to be beaten." She gestured at Dr. Chen's research. "But look at how she writes about quantum mechanics. She doesn't try to dominate it. She tries to understand it, to dance with it. And you believe this human might succeed where the others have failed. Lyra's scales shifted to a shade of blue that hadn't been seen in the palace for centuries, the color of hope. I believe, Father, that she might fail in exactly the right way. As the Earth delegation received the unexpected invitation, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her modest laboratory, unaware that she was about to become the focus of the galaxy's attention. She was doing what she always did, looking at the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be understood. It was an approach that had made her an outsider in human scientific circles. Soon, it would make her something else entirely. Breaking convention. The Centauri Imperial Palace's reception hall buzzed with an energy that made the quantum-stabilized walls flicker. Dr. Sarah Chen stood out among the assembled dignitaries, her simple black suit a stark contrast to the ethereal forms and bioluminescent attire of the alien representatives. She held a small notebook, actual paper, a detail that caused several energy-based beings to pulse with barely concealed disdain. Ambassador Trell, a crystalline being from the Arcturus Confederation, drifted closer to Sarah. I understand humans still process information sequentially. The translator rendered their tone somewhere between curiosity and pity. How quaint. Sarah smiled, continuing to sketch in her notebook. Sometimes the scenic route shows you things you'd miss on the highway. She was drawing the way light bent around the assembled energy beings, creating patterns that reminded her of quantum wave functions. The chamber's atmosphere shifted as Princess Lyra materialized. Unlike her father, she maintained a partially physical form, her scaled body adorned with swirling patterns of light that seemed to respond to the quantum fluctuations in the room. The assembled dignitaries bowed or performed their species-equivalent gestures. Sarah closed her notebook and offered a respectful nod. Welcome, candidates. Lyra's voice resonated at multiple frequencies simultaneously, a traditional Centauri greeting. Today's trial will test not just your understanding of quantum mechanics, but your ability to see beyond conventional solutions. The testing chamber transformed around them. The walls dissolved into a vast starfield, and in the center floated a complex structure of pure energy, a quantum knot, one of the most challenging phenomena in known space. Quantum knots power our cities, maintain our defense systems, and form the backbone of our civilization. Lyra explained. This one is failing. You have one standard rotation to stabilize it. The other candidates immediately began their work. The crystalline beings split into fractal patterns to analyze every angle simultaneously. Energy-based entities merged with the quantum field itself, attempting to manipulate it directly. Synthetic beings deployed swarms of nanocomputers. Sarah walked slowly around the quantum knot, that same small notebook in hand. Dr. Chen, one of the monitoring AIs, spoke up. Our sensors indicate you haven't initiated any computational processes. Do you require assistance? No, thank you, Sarah replied, sketching something in her notebook. I'm just listening. Listening. Ambassador Trell's crystalline form sparkled with amusement. To a quantum phenomenon. Everything has a rhythm, Sarah said, continuing her sketch. Even chaos has patterns, if you know how to look for them. She turned to Princess Lyra. Your Highness, may I ask, how long has this particular knot been in use? Lyra's scales shifted to a curious shade of blue. 3,000 cycles. Why? Because it's not failing, Sarah said, holding up her notebook. She had drawn what looked like a musical score, but instead of notes, it showed the quantum fluctuation patterns. It's evolving. Look at the harmonic resonance between these two quantum states. It's not degrading. It's trying to achieve a more complex configuration. The chamber fell silent. The other candidates paused their calculations. Impossible. Ambassador Trell vibrated. Quantum knots are artificial constructs. They don't evolve. Why not? Sarah asked, walking closer to the knot. The universe is full of self-organizing systems. Galaxies, solar systems, life itself. They all find their own patterns of stability. Why should quantum phenomena be any different? She turned to the princess. The traditional solution would be to force the knot back to its original configuration. But that's like trying to keep a caterpillar from becoming a butterfly. Instead, she made a few more notes in her book, then typed a simple sequence into the chamber's interface. The quantum knot pulsed, its energy patterns shifting. Instead of fighting against its new configuration, Sarah's sequence gently guided it, like a conductor leading an orchestra. The chaotic fluctuations gradually resolved into a more complex, but perfectly stable pattern. Princess Lyra moved closer, her scales now shimmering with a color none of the observers had seen before. "You didn't solve the problem," she said softly. "You understood it. Sometimes understanding is the solution," Sarah replied, closing her notebook. The other candidates erupted in protests. Ambassador Trell's crystalline form vibrated with indignation. "This is absurd. She didn't even use proper quantum calculation methods." "No," Lyra agreed, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "She did something far more difficult. She saw what we were all too busy calculating to notice." She turned to the assembled dignitaries. "The first trial is complete. Dr. Chen will proceed to the next level." As the chamber reset itself, Sarah caught a glimpse of something in the princess's expression. Not just approval, but recognition. For the first time in centuries, Lyra had encountered someone who didn't just seek to prove themselves worthy of the Centauri Empire. They had proved themselves worthy of discovery itself, the heart of innovation. The Imperial Archives stretched infinitely in all directions, its quantum architecture defying traditional spatial limitations. Dr. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on what appeared to be nothing, surrounded by floating holograms of failed trial attempts from centuries past. Princess Lyra observed her from what might have been above. Direction had little meaning here. 5,000 years of attempts, Sarah mused, her hand tracing patterns between different holographic failures. And no one ever questioned why the trials existed in the first place. Lyra's scales shifted to a thoughtful violet. Most were too focused on passing them to consider their purpose. She descended to Sarah's level, her form casting prismatic shadows through the quantum data streams. "But you've been studying the failures rather than the parameters of the trials themselves. Why?" "Because failure often teaches us more than success." Sarah pulled up another hologram, the quantum knot from her first trial. "Like this, everyone before me tried to prevent it from changing. But change itself was the point, wasn't it?" A subtle ripple passed through Lyra's scales, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "You believe there's a pattern to the trials themselves." "There's always a pattern." Sarah stood, her simple movements contrasting with the fluid quantum shifts of the archive around them. "But I think I've been looking at it wrong too. These aren't just tests of scientific knowledge or problem-solving ability. They're questions. Questions about the nature of progress itself." Sarah gestured at the surrounding archives. "The Centauri Empire has achieved things humanity can barely comprehend. You've mastered quantum mechanics, transcended physical form, built cities that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But, Lyra's scales darkened with intensity. "But you're stuck." Sarah said it gently, but firmly. "All this knowledge, all this advancement, and your civilization hasn't produced a truly new innovation in over 3 centuries. You've refined what you know to perfection. But when was the last time you discovered something genuinely unexpected?" The archive seemed to pulse around them, data streams flickering like nervous systems. Several nearby quantum processors paused their calculations, as if listening. "That's a dangerous observation, Dr. Chen." Lyra's voice carried complex harmonics of emotion the translators couldn't quite process. "And what makes you believe a primitive species like humanity could offer anything to an empire that has mastered the fundamental forces of reality?" Sarah smiled. "Because we're still learning to crawl while you've forgotten what it means to walk." She pulled up a new set of holograms, Earth's history of scientific discovery. "Look at our mistakes, our false starts, our completely wrong theories that still somehow led to right answers. We don't have your processing power or your quantum awareness, so we have to feel our way forward. Sometimes that means we find paths that pure logic would never consider. A high-pitched tone filled the archive, the equivalent of a security alert. Ambassador Trell and several council members materialized nearby, their forms rigid with alarm. Princess. Trell's crystalline form pulsed with urgent frequencies. We've detected a critical instability in the primary quantum core. The containment algorithms are failing. Lyra's scales flashed to alarm red. Impossible. The core's quantum architecture is perfect. Too perfect, Sarah whispered, suddenly understanding. She rushed to a nearby data terminal, pulling up schematics of the Empire's quantum power network. It's the same pattern as the quantum knot, but on a massive scale. Your power system isn't failing, it's trying to evolve, but your containment systems are forcing it to maintain its original state. The pressure has been building for centuries. Preposterous. Trell vibrated. The core has maintained quantum stability for millennia. Exactly. Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic interface. You've been so focused on maintaining perfect stability that you didn't notice the entire system wanting to shift to a higher order of organization. If we don't let it evolve naturally, it's going to force the change catastrophically. Lyra moved to Sarah's side, her scales now pulsing with rapid calculations. The math. It's the same pattern as your solution to the quantum knot. Scaled up to network level. The entire empire runs on quantum knots, Sarah explained urgently. They're all connected, all trying to evolve together. Your perfect stability is actually making the system increasingly unstable. We need to let it change. The council erupted in protests, but Lyra held up a hand for silence. She studied the patterns Sarah had revealed, her ancient knowledge combining with this new perspective. If we release the containment protocols, we don't just solve the current crisis, Sarah finished. We open the door to an entirely new level of quantum engineering, but we have to act quickly. Lyra's scales shifted to a color that hadn't been seen in the Empire for millennia, the deep blue of a star about to go nova. Father once told me that the greatest discoveries often come from seeing with new eyes. She turned to the council. Prepare for emergency core protocol adjustment. Dr. Chen, I believe you have a solution to share. As alarms blared throughout the quantum networks of the Empire, Sarah opened her notebook one more time. The future of an entire civilization now rested on humanity's greatest gift, the ability to embrace the unknown not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a dance partner in the endless waltz of discovery. Beyond logic, the central core chamber of the Centauri Empire thrummed with barely contained energy. Quantum processors worked at unprecedented speeds as emergency containment fields flickered around the massive quantum network hub. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the main control interface, her simple notebook open beside complex holographic displays. The containment fields are failing faster than predicted, Ambassador Trell announced, their crystalline form vibrating with barely suppressed panic. We have minutes before catastrophic cascade failure. Princess Lyra's scales pulsed with rapid calculations as she interfaced directly with the quantum network. The standard emergency protocols are only accelerating the degradation. Sarah, what do you see? Sarah's eyes moved between her hand-drawn diagrams and the swirling quantum patterns above. It's like a pressure cooker about to explode. Centuries of forced stability, creating endless feedback loops. She pointed to a particular energy pattern. There. Do you see how the quantum states are almost harmonizing, but the containment fields keep forcing them apart? Harmonizing. Trell's form fractalized in agitation. This isn't music, human. This is advanced quantum engineering. Is it really so different? Sarah questioned, never taking her eyes off the energy patterns. Music is mathematics made audible. Quantum mechanics is reality's symphony. She turned to Lyra. Your empire has been trying to play the same perfect note for centuries. But the universe wants to create new melodies. High Counselor Vex materialized in a burst of energy. The outer sectors are reporting quantum fluctuations in their power grids. We're losing stability across the entire network. Because it's all connected, Sarah whispered, sudden understanding dawning in her eyes. That's it. It's not just the core that needs to evolve. It's the entire network. It's been trying to reach a new state of harmony across all quantum knots simultaneously. Lyra moved closer, her scales shifting to match the frequencies of Sarah's voice, like a choir learning to sing a new song. Exactly. But we can't control this transition with pure logic or mathematics. Sarah pulled up the Empire's entire quantum network diagram. We need to feel the rhythm of the change. Let it happen naturally, guide it rather than force it. Absurd. Trull protested. You're suggesting we release all quantum containment protocols simultaneously. The energy release alone would flow into new patterns. Lyra interrupted, her scales now pulsing with the same frequency as the quantum fluctuations, like water finding its own level. Sarah's right. We've been fighting against the natural evolution of our own technology. Emergency alerts blared throughout the chamber as more sectors reported critical instabilities. Time was running out. Your Highness, Sarah said quietly, I need you to trust me. Not my calculations or theories, just my intuition. The chamber fell silent. In that moment, Lyra realized why none of her previous trials had found a worthy partner. She hadn't been looking for someone who could master Centauri technology. She'd been searching for someone who could see beyond it. What do you need? Sarah smiled. First, we need to reprogram the quantum containment fields. Instead of forcing specific patterns, they should act more like suggestions, like jazz musicians following a basic structure but free to improvise. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting new parameters. The quantum fields around them shifted, their rigid geometric patterns becoming more fluid, more organic. Now, she continued, we need to synchronize the release across all sectors. Not simultaneously, that would be catastrophic. We need to create a cascade, like a wave of dominoes, but each sector finding its own timing. Lyra's scales brightened with understanding. A quantum harmony. Exactly. Your Highness, can you interface with the network? Feel its rhythms. I can see the patterns, but you can actually sense them directly. Lyra closed her eyes, her form beginning to resonate with the quantum fields. The chamber's lighting pulsed in sync with her bioluminescent patterns. Council members, she commanded, link with me. Feel the network's song. One by one, the assembled Centauri leaders joined their consciousness with Lyra's, creating a living interface with the quantum network. Sarah watched in awe as their energy forms began to pulse in complex patterns, like an orchestra tuning before a performance. Now, Sarah said softly, let go. Don't try to control it. Just listen, feel, guide. The quantum containment fields began to shift, not failing but transforming. Energy patterns that had been rigid for centuries started to flow like water, finding new channels, new configurations. The alarms throughout the chamber changed tone, moving from warning screams to something almost musical. It's working, Trull whispered, their crystalline form reflecting the new quantum patterns in facets of light. The network is stabilizing, but in ways our equations never predicted. Sarah watched as the quantum knots across the Empire began to dance to their own rhythm, each finding its unique resonance while maintaining harmony with the whole. It was beautiful, unpredictable, and absolutely alive. What no one noticed in those transformative moments was how Lyra's scales had shifted to match the exact frequency of Sarah's heartbeat. Some harmonies, it seemed, transcended even quantum mechanics. A new partnership. The Imperial Palace's Grand Hall had been transformed. Where once quantum fields maintained rigid geometric patterns, now they flowed in elegant, ever-changing waves of light and energy. 2 weeks had passed since the quantum network's evolution, and the Empire was still discovering the implications of its transformation. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at a window, watching transport vessels move through newly optimized quantum corridors in the sky. Their paths were less predictable now, but somehow more efficient, like a murmuration of starlings finding perfect flight patterns through instinct rather than calculation. The outer sectors report a 30% increase in energy efficiency, Princess Lyra said, materializing beside her. Her scales now shifted through patterns that would have been considered chaotic by old Centauri standards, but held their own kind of beauty. And our quantum computers are processing in ways our engineers never imagined possible. Because they're not just processing anymore, Sarah replied, sketching something in her ever-present notebook. They're learning, growing. Every quantum knot in the Empire is finding its own way to sing. Ambassador Trell approached, their crystalline form now refracting light in complex, unpredictable patterns. The Council has finished its preliminary analysis of the network transformation. We have been humbled, Dr. Chen. Centuries of advancement, and we never saw what was right in front of us. Sometimes the closest things are the hardest to see, Sarah said. Humanity is still stumbling through the cosmos, making mistakes, getting things wrong. But maybe that's our gift to the galaxy. We haven't learned enough to stop questioning everything. Emperor Nexus materialized, his energy form now harmonizing with the new quantum rhythms of the palace. The Alliance representatives have arrived for the ceremony. Are you prepared, Dr. Chen? Sarah closed her notebook, tucking it into her pocket. Actually, Your Majesty, I have a question about that. She turned to Lyra. These trials, they were never really about finding someone who could solve impossible problems, were they? Lyra's scales shifted to a deep, thoughtful blue. What do you think they were about? Understanding, not just quantum mechanics or scientific principles, but understanding why we seek knowledge in the first place. Sarah gestured at the transformed quantum fields around them. Your civilization achieved such incredible things that you forgot the joy of discovery itself. The trials weren't tests, they were a cry for help. The chamber fell silent. Lyra moved closer, her form resonating with frequencies that made the quantum fields around them dance. 5 centuries ago, I realized our empire was perfecting itself into stagnation. We needed someone who could see with new eyes, who could remind us what it meant to explore rather than just know. Her scales rippled with something like amusement. Though I admit, I didn't expect that someone to be human. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Traditional Centauri protocol would have me join the Imperial family, help govern the Empire. Perhaps, Lyra said. It's time for some new protocols. She waved her hand, and a holographic display appeared showing a vast space station at the border of Centauri and Earth space. We're calling it the Harmony Institute, a place where human intuition and Centaur knowledge can come together, where we can learn from each other. Sarah's eyes widened as she studied the design. The whole structure, it's built like a quantum knot, one that will keep evolving, Lyra confirmed. With you as its first director, if you're willing. Not as a member of the Imperial family, but as a partner in discovery. The assembled council members and Alliance representatives waited expectantly. In the past, such a counterproposal to Imperial tradition would have been unthinkable. But the quantum fields dancing around them were proof that unthinkable things could lead to wonderful discoveries. Sarah opened her notebook one last time, looking at the sketches and notes that had helped her see patterns where others saw only problems. You know, she said with a smile, I think the universe has been trying to teach us this lesson all along. The most beautiful things happen when different patterns learn to dance together. Lyra's scales shifted to that same deep blue of possibility she'd shown when first reading Sarah's quantum theories. Is that a yes? It's a let's find out, Sarah replied. After all, isn't that the most exciting answer there is? The quantum fields pulsed with new energy as human and Centauri, intuition and knowledge, art and science came together in ways neither civilization had imagined possible. Above them, the 3 suns of the Centauri system cast their light through the crystal dome, creating patterns that had never been seen before and would never be seen exactly the same way again. And in the heart of the transformed empire, a new song was just beginning to play. one whose melody would echo through the cosmos, inviting all who heard it to join in the eternal dance of discovery.